Good morning, 8th grade. How's everyone doing today? I am Mr. Baker, and this is the Spanish American War. Today, we are going to be talking about the Spanish American War and the what happened after we jumped into battle. We've talked about the main causes, and we went over them quite a bit. So let's jump into what happened after the Maine exploded. We have the Teller Amendment. After the explosion of the USS Maine, President McKinley requested $50 million to begin to prepare for war. He knew the country was pretty much going at it. He knew people were angry, and he knew that the U.S. had to do something. So he asked for this money and said, "Okay, we need to start building up our military because Spain's no joke. They had a pretty good military. They've been around for a while. They knew how to fight, and we were going to war." U.S. issued a document declaring that Cuba was independent and demanded that Spain leave the island within 3 days, or else. Dun dun dun. They also attached the Teller Amendment, which stated that the U.S. had no interest in taking control of Cuba. This is important that the Teller Amendment had said that the U.S. was not going to take control of Cuba. The Teller Amendment said the U.S. was not going to take control of Cuba. What's the Teller Amendment? Oh, it's a funny question you should ask. It says that the U.S. had no interest in taking control of Cuba. In response to the amendment, Spain declared war on the U.S., and the next day, the U.S. declared war on Spain. We have the Philippines. While Spain was preparing for war in Cuba, the U.S. decided to attack the Philippines in another Spanish colony. The Philippines was also owned by Spain, and they said, "You know what? Forget you, Spain. We're coming after everything you own." The Philippines were having similar issues as the Cubans, and were in the middle of a big revolt against Spain. As soon as the war was declared, the U.S. took 4 warships to the Philippines and sailed into Manila Bay, destroying the whole Spanish fleet that was stationed there. The war in the Philippines was not very fun. The U.S. for Spain, the U.S. sank or captured 10 ships and killed over 380 Spanish soldiers. They did this. They lost 0 ships and 0 men. The U.S. really beat up on Spain pretty bad. The rebel Philippine troops in the U.S. took control of the capital shortly after the battle started. In the Caribbean, it's warm. It is beautiful. I love the Caribbean. I've been there several times, but it is warm. It is very, very warm there, especially if you were a U.S. troop. It was not a very nice place to go fight. At the beginning of the war, the U.S. Army was not prepared. They had just started preparing, and that $50 million didn't go very far. They started off the war with only 28,000 soldiers. Soon they started begging for volunteers, and people said, "Hey, I got to go fight in the Caribbean. I'm going to go down there. That sounds pretty nice." They soon got over 280,000 soldiers to volunteer. The army did not have enough rifles or bullets to supply each person, so they had to share in the beginning until they were able to make more and get them down to the troops. Soldiers were given warm wool clothes to use in the Caribbean climate. Doesn't sound like a bad thing if you were fighting, I don't know, say in northern Canada or Alaska, but down in the Caribbean where it is very, very hot, 80, 90 degrees normally, wearing wool clothes is not very fun. Picture walking out and playing basketball in July outside with a hoodie and sweatpants and a winter jacket on. That's kind of how it would feel. So these soldiers had to face harsh living conditions while fighting in Cuba. They had horrible food. Like with everything else, they were not prepared for all these soldiers to go down and fight with their food. They had to eat canned meat. Some of you might be saying, "Well, I've tried Spam before, and Spam isn't that bad." Well, Spam doesn't taste great if you ask most people, but this was way, way worse. Many soldiers got sick with yellow fever and other deadly diseases. Over 2,000 American soldiers died from these diseases. Less than 400 soldiers actually died in battle. So 2,000 people died just from diseases, only 400 died in battle. If you look at here is a picture of the canned meat that they were eating right here. And over here in the other advertisement, they have If you look at what some of these things say, ox tongues. All right, that's a tongue of an ox actually in a can. Mutton, ugh, and some different foods that people were just not used to eating, and these were not very good. A lot of times they were spoiled, or they'd come out with no taste, or what was even worse is if they came out with taste, and the taste was just horrible, and soldiers got really sick. The Rough Riders. Roosevelt was in charge of this group of mounted soldiers. The group of volunteers was made of Native Americans, African Americans, college athletes, cowboys, miners, and ranchers. This was a group of soldiers that pretty much nobody else wanted in their army. That everyone said, "Oh, they're not going to make good soldiers. We don't want them." Teddy Roosevelt's like, "Give them to me. I'll show you what they can do." They ended up being such a elite, awesome fighting force that they started earning worldwide fame. They've done so many heroic things that they became famous all around the world. Four African Americans received the Congressional Medal of Honor, which was huge because they didn't give this medal out to black people, and these what they had to do in the Rough Riders, they actually earned it, which was is this was really a huge thing for African Americans to get the Congressional Medal of Honor, so it was pretty cool. In June 1898, U.S. troops invaded the hills around Santiago and was able to overwhelm or take over the Spanish troops. They then moved from town to town, taking control. 4 days later, the Spanish troops tried to break through the American lines. They did an all out attack. They sent everything they had to try to destroy the American lines, but they failed, losing every ship that the Spanish had in the Pacific. They surrendered 2 weeks later. The U.S. started peace talks with Spain, who was definitely going to be beaten down. U.S. troops invaded Puerto Rico, who surrendered with little resistance. Spain signed a peace treaty in August. The U.S. gained a lot of territory in the Spanish American War. They had a lot to gain from this war, and that's one of the reasons why they went to war. The peace treaty placed Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines all under U.S. control. The Teller Amendment said that the U.S. would not annex Cuba, not take over Cuba, but President McKinley wanted to create stability there, wanted to make sure no other groups came in or no weird people took control, so he could increase U.S. economic activity there. So he created a military government. They said that we're not going to make you part of the United States, but we are going to come in and we are going to put our own government in there. They quickly began building schools and sanitation systems. Diseases remained a major issue, though. They sent a team of doctors down to determine the cause of yellow fever, which was, they found out later on that it was caused by mosquitoes. Yellow fever was bad, it killed a lot of people, but it was caused by mosquitoes biting people. The Platt Amendment. The U.S. helped the Cuban government write a constitution. This included the Platt Amendment, which limited Cuba's rights to make treaties and allowed the U.S. to intervene in Cuban affairs. They made the Cuban government sell or lease land to the U.S., so the U.S. got to either buy or rent land from Cuba. The Cuban people accepted, and the U.S. troops withdrew their soldiers. This stayed in effect until 1934. They accepted this, even though it was not a very good amendment for them because it gave the U.S. a lot of power, but they were able to accept it because it got all the troops out of Cuba, and Cuba was able to start running their own business, own their own country. Puerto Rico, like Cuba, Puerto Rico hoped for independence, but the U.S. made them a territory. In 1900, the Foraker Act established a civil government in Puerto Rico. The U.S. began debating about the territory. In 1917, the Jones Act gave Puerto Rican citizenship to the United States. So they did end up annexing Puerto Rico and made them part of the United States. In the Philippines, Spain surrendered the Philippines for $20 million. U.S. hoped that they could use it as a refueling station, like we talked about before, so they could send their ships down there to get more coal, and it would stop European countries from seizing them. The Filipinos hoped for independence after the U.S. decided to annex them. They rebelled. Over 4,200 U.S. soldiers and more than 20,000 Filipinos died before the war ended. The U.S. kept control of the Philippines until 1946, when they granted them full independence and allowed them to run their own country. This right here is an awesome political cartoon. We are going to talk about this quite a bit, but I want you to really analyze it, and you're going to have to answer a couple questions. Well, that's all I have today. I hope you guys enjoyed my video, and good luck answering the questions. Remember, everything's in complete sentences. I will see you all in class. Have a fantastic day.